Why, hello there, old sports, and can you tell Five Nights at Freddy's is my current hyperfixation? In all seriousness, regardless of if these videos do well, I still feel like making them right now, so I'm going to keep making them. I'm just gonna have to try to ignore that little itching feeling in the back of my mind telling me I'm completely useless, but that's nothing new. Anyways, to actually get into the subject of this video, after my last video I made about how the FNaF 3 map in Secret of the Mimic was probably a visual bug, and if you want more context on what that means, there should be a card up in the corner. But what I was trying to get at is that after thinking about that, I was thinking about other things, including FNaF 3 just in general. And I came to a realization. Does FNaF 3 actually matter that much in the grand scheme of the timeline? Now, I know people are kind of upset in general that Five Nights at Freddy's 6 didn't have very many lasting consequences, at least in some ways, because it's implied that maybe the MCI are still around through the Tangle, or Blob, or whatever you want to call it, or all these other things. Did this character survive? There's a theory that has, like, almost every character from that whole game surviving, except maybe Henry, because by that point you'd be pretty old anyway, so it makes sense that he probably kicked the bucket in that whole scenario. But I guess my point is that people were kind of upset in general that it felt like only one or two people died in this whole scenario when the whole point of it was supposed to be wrapping up all the loose ends. And while I do completely understand and even agree that that's frustrating and not very satisfying story-wise, I'd also like to bring up that FNaF 3 has very similar problems in terms of the whole not much gets done angle. But where FNaF 6, those come down to theories on whether stuff actually was resolved or not. FNaF 3's whole story comes down to, well, we tried. Okay, let's try again, because it didn't work. Now, before elaborating on what I mean, I would like to explain that I'm like one of the 50 people who actually really love FNaF 3 and consider it one of the best games in the series. So, I hope this doesn't come across as me just trying to slander FNaF 3, because as much as this is me laughing at the story for nothing happening, it's also me being sad about the fact that nothing is happening. To start out this video, ironically I want to actually begin with the ending of FNaF 3, and whether the good ending or bad ending is canon. When asked about which Five Nights at Freddy's 3 ending was canon in his second interview with Dawko, Scott Cawthon said that, "The answer is very interesting. The answer is complex. However, I'm not going to answer it because it's only going to cause strife." Now, I feel like by saying the answer is complex, that already kind of spells out what he meant by that in a way, because if the answer was just one or the other, the good ending or normal ending, that would be simple. That would be just matter of fact, that would be a simple answer, a clean answer, regardless of if you want either ending to be canon. Just saying, hey, this ending is canon or this ending is canon is a clear-cut answer. But that's not what it is, apparently. It's confusing and it's complex. So I feel like what he means, or at least my theory on it, and this is a theory that I've seen other people say too, is that at the time of FNaF 3, the normal ending is the ending that happens, but by the time of FNaF 6, that's when the happiest day good ending takes place. So both endings are canon at different times. Now, if we work under the assumption that this theory is correct, or at least that the answer is that it's more confusing than one ending is canon or the other is canon, I feel like we can say that, yeah, FNaF 3 is not really important in the sense that any good ending that happens in FNaF 3 can happen later, and probably does happen later, and could have happened later under different circumstances. I feel like it's pretty agreeable and reasonable to say that specifically the Happiest Day minigames aren't happening real time in FNaF 3. Like, whoever's running the pizzeria or whoever the night guard is isn't typing a phone number into wall tiles and then exploring a Fredbear stage maze labyrinth thingy. I always got the vibe that the FNaF 3 minigames were more of a gameplay feature for our sake, and while characters in-universe probably had a hand to play in making sure the Happiest Day happened, I don't know if it exactly happened. I doubt it happened the exact way we play through it in the game. So to cut this tangent short, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that anything that could have been done in FNaF 3 to achieve the Happiest Day could have been done later, and probably was done later. Something I forgot to mention in the last video was that any special qualities the FNaF 3 building may have are also qualities that the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator building would have. because they both contain a lot of Fazbear artifacts, even if it's for different reasons, because in FNAF 3, all those relics are there because they're trying to cash in on nostalgia, while in FNAF 6, they're trying to gather everything together so they can destroy all of Fazbear's legacy in one clean sweep. And segueing into my next topic, I feel like that's another important thing to mention. A lot of things that happen in FNAF 3 are things that happen in a greater way in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, which I feel like ends up making FNAF 3 redundant in the long run, because where FNAF 3 things fail to happen, those same things happen in FNAF 6 to a more successful degree. Because even if you believe X or Y character or object survived the FNAF 6 fire, it at least took the company out of commission for a couple years before they got back on their feet and started doing Pizzaplex stuff and AR and VR stuff. While in FNAF 3 to 6, that period in between those games, there was just a bunch of cryptids wandering around Utah doing who knows what. Even if they survived FNAF 6, they were still buried under a building in a sinkhole. They were kinda out of commission in terms of harming random people. And honestly, to me, the thing that I feel like does the most damage to FNAF 3's quote-unquote relevance to the current story is the existence of Sister Location, because by the end of that game, you have Ennard running around in the sewers. Because when FNAF 3 was made, yes, it was intended to be the end of the series, and it had a lot more relevance. It was the finale to the series. But then FNAF 4 came out, and it didn't really damage FNAF 3's standing because FNAF 4 was a step back in the timeline. It was trying to clear up the origins of the series instead of moving forward. But then, Sister Location, even though it was also looking at the past, it added a new character that needed to be dealt with, I guess, is the best way to put it. You added Ennard, who needed to had their character resolved, because even if Afton did die in the FNAF 3 fire, which even back in FNAF 3, it was implied he lived, you still need to deal with Ennard. And I think that's why so many people, today at least, feel like FNAF 3 isn't as satisfying of an ending as FNAF 6, though there are definitely plenty of people who prefer FNAF 3 as an ending, and that's completely fine. I just think it's interesting, because yeah, when you go back and start to introduce more loose ends that need to be tied up in the future, when you go back to that original ending where those things hadn't existed yet, it feels like you're forgetting something. And that's where FNAF 6 comes in, and brings all the loose ends together to quite literally burn them to the ground. Even if we ignore Ennard for a bit, I still feel like we should talk about the big bad of FNAF 3, that being Springtrap. And while I do believe Springtrap is the best version of Afton we get in the series, I feel like that there isn't really any consequences for him at the end of FNAF 3. Yeah, he gets burned in a building, but he survives that and seems to recuperate by the time of FNAF 6. Adding on to that, if anything, it seems like by the time of FNAF 6, Afton is almost more happy or stronger in a weird way. Because in FNAF 3, he sounds miserable when you hear him groaning and moaning as he shambles throughout the halls, and then also he's very much limited by the springlock suit he's stuck in, because the reason you're able to lure him around with the audio is because the springlock suit he's stuck in is programmed to move towards the sound of children so it can entertain them. But by the time of FNAF 6, that trick only seems to work on him because he's doing it out of his own will. And I think that's something else I want to bring up, is FNAF 6, even if his design is kind of dumb compared to the perfection that is Springtrap, Scraptrap seems a lot more cognizant and aware of his own surroundings. He's able to talk again, he's able to exert more of his own will rather than being exploited by the limitations of the suit he's in, because the suit is different, or at least it was damaged so much by the fire that he had to replace it with different parts that weren't able to quote-unquote betray him as easily. Now, I do feel like I should state that there is a good chance that this is less lore-related and more just coming down to the developments Scott had when he was making FNAF 3 compared to the limitations he had when he was making FNAF 6. Because back in FNAF 3, there wasn't voice acting, so maybe Scott wanted Springtrap to come across like he does in something like Dead by Daylight, where he's a lot more cocky and bombastic, but he just couldn't get that done back in the days of FNAF 3, but by the time he gets to FNAF 6, he was able to bring that to reality. But then again, the fact that that isn't clear just goes to show how almost obsolete FNaF 3 is in the grand scheme of things. Now, as I briefly mentioned earlier, I do think part of this is because FNaF 3 was originally supposed to end things off, but when he went back and continued the series, by the time he got to FNaF 6, he kind of tried to make it look like FNaF 3 and kind of feel the same, because he felt like FNaF 3 was a good ending, so he wanted that to come across in FNaF 6, but in the process it made FNaF 6 look more important than FNaF 3 in the grand scheme of things. So, by the end of FNaF 3, William is not only alive, but he seems to be better than he was at the beginning of the game. The missing children are still stuck in their metal animatronic prisons, so they're not doing too well either. And they don't seem to get any closure till at least FNaF 6, and again, that's if you believe FNaF 6 is where those kids' souls got to go to rest, and not like sometime after Security Breach or whatever. And then on top of that, everything that seems to happen in FNaF 3 happens again in FNaF 6 to more success. But then again, maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason Security Breach implies so much survives the FNaF 6 fire is because neither of those building burnings ended up working in the way they were intended to. Because even if the physical threats were killed, even if you put the hair down, the agony is still remaining in the world. The pain left behind by the crimes these people have committed are still lingering in this area. So maybe there needs to be another way these souls are put to rest. Maybe the Stitch Wraith epilogues, where they kind of just let people be at peace and just exist in these good memories, maybe that's the way the series is supposed to end. Maybe it's trying to say something about how just hurting people back and forth isn't getting anywhere, but I don't know. That last minute was just like a crack theory I just came up with out of nowhere, so I'm not even sure. I might elaborate on it in the future if I have more ideas that go down that road, but who knows. Again, I'd like to reiterate that Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is one of my favorite FNaF games. In fact, it's my second favorite behind Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator / FNaF 6. So, I hope this doesn't come across as me trying to slander it. I think this is just a case of the original games not holding up very well compared to the new ones, because they were kind of slapped together in terms of storytelling. There wasn't really meant to be a story as much, or at least the story was supposed to be a lot more simple. So as we move forward throughout the games that release, things get progressively more confusing, and then they start to get a little more reasonable again. It's a whole thing. I'm trying to write out a FNaF timeline, and yikes, it gets very confusing very fast, because it starts out simple, and then you start to run into things that just become more and more confusing. So I feel like the idea that FNaF 3 is kind of obsolete is just a consequence of the series existing for so long and repeating itself in different ways and bringing up new things in other ways. So it just doesn't look as good as it did 10 years ago. But then again, this is all just my opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. In fact, if you like this video, please consider commenting, and subscribing, as well, at least liking and subscribing and commenting, to my knowledge, are things that boost my channel in the algorithm and shows YouTube that I'm not stupid or something. Insert joke here. In all seriousness though, I do appreciate your time today watching this video. It means the world to me. And I'd also like to shout out my 2 Patreon members, Skill Issue and Sven Biscuit. Thank you for your continued support, and that means the world to me as well, but like a layer higher or something. So, hope you have a good day, good evening, good night, whatever time it is for you, and see you on the flip side.